Welcome to Baha'i Books and Authors, a podcast which introduces to you writers and the works they've penned related to the Baha'i Faith. We'll explore the inspiration, the process, and the stories behind their work. I'm your host, Jan Grammer. This podcast is produced by World Unity Media, which also produces Baha'i audiobooks. Early one morning, 4-year-old Howie arrives at a doorstep. He carefully takes off his shoes, goes inside, and runs to the man who's sitting by the window. He throws his arms around the man's neck and whispers in his ear, "My lord, can't we have macaroni for lunch?" Abdu'l-Baha recounted this story at lunch, and then a very large plate of macaroni arrived at the table. He laughed, promptly rose, and placed the plate right in front of little Howard Kinney. What was it like to be in the Holy Land as a child or a youth in the time of the central figures of the faith? What were their interactions with them and the Holy Family? These sweet, tender, and often funny stories, gathered together in the book A Child in the Holy Land, gives us a glimpse of different facets of the Holy Family and their day-to-day lives that we don't normally hear about. We can even learn Bahiya Khanum, the greatest holy leaf's instructions for Persian rice. We have Gisu Mohadjer to thank for this special compilation of wonderful stories. It's a great joy and honor to welcome you, Gisu, today.
Thank you so much, Jan. I'm so happy to be here.
You dedicate your book to two women. Let's begin first with your amazing mother, Knight of Baha'u'llah, Iran, Gisu Mohadjer. You specify for taking you to the Holy Land for the first time when you were a mere 40 days old. How much time throughout your childhood do you estimate you were in those sacred environs?
I spent a lot of time in the Holy Land as a child. When I was 40 days old, we went from Germany to the Holy Land. This was during the time of the custodians. The beloved guardian had passed away. The Universal House of Justice had not yet been elected. My mother and I went to Haifa, and we stayed there until after the election of the Universal House of Justice, so about 2 years. She and I and my father, when he was with us, he was the hand of the cause of God, Dr. Rahmatullah Mohadjer. The three of us were given the first room as you enter the Haifa Pilgrim House on the right. That was our bedroom. So I lived in the Haifa Pilgrim House for the first 2 years of my childhood. Since my grandparents, the hand of the cause of God, Mr. Furitan and his wife, were living in the Holy Land, I went back and forth throughout my childhood. And of course, as an adult, I try to go as often as I can.
I can't imagine how wonderful and special that must have been. We'll get to some of your stories in just a moment. The other woman in your dedication is Hand of the Cause of God, Amatobaha Rihia Khanum. Of her you say, "Who made my childhood heavenly." In what ways did she do that?
Rihia Khanum, of course, made my whole life heavenly, not just my childhood, but since this was a book about children, I started with that. You see my picture with her. It's right at the beginning in the dedication section. I was just a baby when I had the great honor and bounty of being with her. I continued to have that incredible association for 40 more years until her passing. It was the greatest blessing of my life.
What inspired you to compile this delightful book?
I had heard almost all of these stories growing up in the holy places. I knew many people who had known the members of the Holy Family. I knew Mr. Samandari, who of course had met Baha'u'llah, and I heard the stories that he told from him. I knew at least 4 people who had met Abdu'l-Baha, and I had heard their stories from them. When we would visit the holy places, I was told these stories, and that made the holy places feel very intimate and personal to me. And so when I had children and I took them to the holy places, I would share these stories with them. And it was actually my children who encouraged me to compile the stories and to put them together in a book.
How did you choose which stories to include?
It was difficult actually to find the stories because I had only heard them, but I didn't want to say, these are stories I have heard. I wanted them to be from published, authentic sources. So that was difficult, finding the stories that I knew existed. Bahaj Tahirzadeh, who is the editor at the Baha'i Publishing Trust in the United States, he gave me some very good advice. I asked him whether I should rewrite the stories. He told me not to do that, to leave it in the authentic voice of the children themselves. I think that's made it a very special and authentic book.
Were there any challenges then in gathering these stories?
Well, the challenges were finding the stories that I knew were there. Some of them were in audio form, which I could transcribe. Some were in published materials. There were some stories in unpublished materials that I didn't want to include, except the stories of my mother with the beloved guardian.
Though he was burdened with so many responsibilities, Abdul Baha spends a tremendous amount of time with the children. Tell us about that and what you found.
The love and concern for the children by the Holy Family starts on the very first day that the prisoners are taken off the boat and they're imprisoned in the citadel. There isn't any food, there isn't any water. The children are crying, they're desperate and hungry. Abdul Baha tries to get some food and water for the prisoners, but they couldn't eat the food that they were given. Among all of the materials that the prisoners had brought with them, they managed to find a little bit of bread and a little bit of sugar that they made into some kind of a food that they prepared for Baha'u'llah, who had been very sick. Instead of accepting, he asked that this be given to the children who were hungry. So from that very first day, the Blessed Beauty Baha'u'llah was worried about the children, cared for the children, thought about the children, and tried to do everything that he could to make the lives of the children easier and happier in these terrible circumstances. And of course, Abdul Baha continued to do this throughout his ministry.
The stories that you convey in the book when the master was with the children just shows such love and patience and giving of his time. I wonder, how did he find that time? Or because he was Abdul Baha, he made that time.
It's incredible to think of everything that Abdul Baha had to do and then everything that he did and everything he did for the children. And it wasn't only him. Nobody was overqualified to take care of the children or to be with the children or to teach the children. Abdul Baha asked Meshkin Qalam, who is the greatest calligrapher since the 16th century, whose works sell at the auction houses in Europe for huge sums of money, to be the person to teach reading and writing to the children. Abdul Baha asked Zain al-Muqarrabin, who is the greatest Islamic legal scholar that we have in the faith, who was permitted to ask questions about the Kitab al-Aqdas. He was asked to teach Arabic to the children. So the children were really given a level of education from the very best that was available in the community, including by Abdul Baha himself.
I enjoyed it very much when you mentioned in your book the atmosphere of being in the Holy Land around the Holy Family. Please share more on that atmosphere.
Bahia Winkler says it best in the story on page 45, where she says, "I was wrapped in a feeling of love towards the Master that flooded my heart." There's this absolute feeling of being surrounded by love that you feel in the Holy Land. I hope through these stories of the Holy Family and their interactions with the children, where in every way that was important to the children, they are loved and nurtured and supported.
Not only do you tell stories, the stories that the children or the youth themselves told about their time in the Holy Land, but then many of them went on to extraordinary service to the faith. You do capture that in your book. Can you tell us where and about that?
There's a small section at the back called The History of the Children. This tells a little bit about the children whose stories are included. You'll see it includes two martyrs, Badi and Ruhullah Vaqa. It includes a Hand of the Cause, Tarzullah Samandari. It includes two Knights of Baha'u'llah. It includes a member of the Universal House of Justice. It includes a Continental Counselor, and many others. One of the children, for example, is Wendell Dodge, who was 18 when he was on pilgrimage and was in the household of Abdul Baha. When he was older, by the time Abdul Baha visited the United States, Wendell was a very well-known journalist, and he was the first person who interviewed Abdul Baha and wrote the article that was given to all the New York newspapers. Through the Associated Press, was shared worldwide. So he's just one of the children, one of these beautiful children.
Oh, that's just so wonderful. Tell us about the index.
I spent a lot of time on the index. I actually really love it. So, my first idea for the book was that it be organized by location. So that in the same way that I had the experience that I would go to a certain location and I would hear the stories of the children, that it be organized that way. But with my mother's help and input, we decided to organize it according to the member of the Holy Family. But the index then allows you to look up, for example, locations in Akka, and then you can see the stories that are related. So if you're on pilgrimage, you can go. It has, for example, stories about the gifts that were given. It has a list of all the meals that they ate and the food that they had. So you can see how simple the food was. And that when people describe this incredible experience of being on pilgrimage and associating with the Holy Family, it wasn't about the food they were eating. It was about the love that they had and the love that they were shown.
You mentioned your mother and Shoghi Effendi. Can you tell us one of those stories, please?
When my mother was 7 years old, she went on pilgrimage with her parents. She stayed with her mother, with the women, and met the beloved guardian in the house of the master with the women. On the second day, the beloved guardian asked my mother to come and sit next to him on the sofa. She was reluctant to do that. Her mother nudged her forward. She went and sat beside the guardian, and the guardian put his arm around her, pulled her close, and stayed that way throughout their time with the women. My mother tells the story that after that, on all the subsequent days, she would just immediately go and sit next to the guardian. She has extremely vivid and happy memories of her pilgrimage with the beloved guardian.
That is so precious. Thank you for sharing that. What about a favorite story of yours?
They're all my favorites, but there's one in particular that I really love, which is that in the summer of 1987, Amatul Bahariya Khanum invited me to spend a month in the Holy Land. During that time, she was very busy, as she always was. And one of the things that she was doing was preparing and decorating the house of Abdullah Pasha in Akka. One day, when we were there together, she told me the story herself. I absolutely love it. It's on page 62 of the book. If you don't mind, I'll read it to you. In the house of Abdullah Pasha, there used to be a parrot. The greatest holy leaf used to take a mirror, hold it before the bird, and bid it to say, Ya Elahi va Mahbubi, O my God and my beloved, and to say, Shoghi Jan, Shoghi dear. Early in the morning, at dawn, the household could hear the parrot crying, Ya Elahi va Mahbubi, Shoghi Jan, with its high pitch. I love that story because it showed the incredible love of the greatest holy leaf for Shoghi Effendi, and just the idea that the entire household was woken up by this parrot saying, Shoghi Jan, Shoghi Jan, Shoghi Jan. I just love that story so much.
Thank you for telling us that story. That is so wonderful. Was there a specific theme or message you wanted to convey with your book?
Everyone who reads the book will come away with their own ideas and their own messages. For me, the overwhelming message is that children are beloved. They're beloved by the Holy Family. They're cared for, that we should follow in their footsteps and be as loving as we can to the children in our lives.
What would you like the readers to feel as they're reading your book?
I would love them to feel close to the Holy Family and close to the holy places. These places were places where children played, where they ran around, where they were naughty, where they would run into the kitchen to get candy and sugar. This is a living place that is our heritage.
This book is full of joy. To be a child in the Holy Land and near the members of the central figures of the faith and the Holy Family. We deeply appreciate your lovingly compiling this book, Gisu, and thank you so much for joining us today.
It was such a pleasure, Jan. Thank you.
A Child in the Holy Land by Gisu Mohadjer is available on Bahá'íBookstore.com or wherever you get your distribution services. Subscribe or follow Baha'i Books and Authors with your chosen podcast platform. This podcast is produced by World Unity Media.